Today's episode of Open Container is presented by Oboes. Many of you already know Oboes, that plucky little brand from Bozeman that stood up in 2007 in a crowded footwear space and said, "There's room for me too." An upstart outlier with a weird name, roomy toe box, and well-built offerings for committed hikers. It's a combination that has attracted a loyal following for 20 years. And we're excited to partner with Oboes because they are committed to shining a light on the core activity to all our outdoor pursuits: hiking. Hiking. The thing we all do, but no one is talking about. We are unified by hiking. Oboes loves hiking. And that's something I can get down with. Over the coming months, we'll be opening the container and getting on the trail with our friends from Bozeman. Oboes. Love hiking. Welcome to Open Container. I'm Doug Schnitzbein. I'm a journalist, writer, and overall lover of the outdoors. I've fought wildfires, reported on national politics, published magazines, and even gone chasing waterfalls barefoot. On this podcast, we're going to have an open conversation about culture, conservation, policy, business, issues that matter the most to the outdoor community. Let's get some. I competed hard in high school. I ran track, indoor track, cross country. I played soccer from a young age, and when I was a freshman, I found out I was a strong runner and that I could run varsity cross country rather than play freshman soccer. I'm extremely competitive, so I love the idea of being able to run against and beat seniors. I wanted to win, relish the thrill of pitting myself against myself, the way you do in an individual competition. But it was hard, draining. When you compete constantly, it possesses you. All you can think about is winning, and you keep wanting to push yourself harder and harder. My race was the 800 meters, which is 2 laps around the outdoor track. And my philosophy on it was to run the first lap as hard as I could and the second lap faster. It worked quite often, but I remember being in an indoor track meet, which was 5 laps around a small track in a crowded gym, and being beat in the final 100 meters by a kid who I had just watched puke in a garbage can moments before the race. That was what you had to do to succeed at that level. I competed in county and state meets where I found out that I wasn't really all that good. There was always someone better than you, always some freak who was faster. As I kept competing through high school, I started to miss the team sports I loved so much. I missed having fun. I loved baseball and wanted to be out there in the spring catching flies. I played football in the side yard almost every afternoon with friends growing up. I was a good soccer player and I loved playing basketball. Still do. There's nothing like meeting a bunch of people on a pickup court and all of a sudden becoming friends and playing together like a team. When I first started to embrace outdoor sports, one of the things I loved about them was that lack of competition. It was more about fun. You would challenge and push yourself, sure, but it wasn't in a way that was being judged or timed or having any organization behind it. No one had to tell you who is better or best. It's just about being with your friends, maybe pushing boundaries together. First of all, having a good time. In the early 1990s, I was working in a music venue in Somerville, Massachusetts called Johnny D's, and a bunch of us who worked there started to get into the emerging sport of mountain biking. We had horrible bikes, steel-framed giant iguanas, and we took them out to a place called the Middlesex Fells right on the edge of Boston. The trails were rocky and filled with broken glass. We probably busted a derailleur every time we went out. But none of that mattered. It was fun. It's fun to be out there. It's fun to try hard stuff on bad bikes. It's fun to be together. I enjoyed that vibe when I came out west and started backcountry skiing. And I enjoyed it when I lived in Seattle and headed out with my friend Isaac to find obscure, often unintentionally epic mountain bike rides off on the east side of the Cascades. At the same time, a lot of my friends started to get into competitive sides of the sport. Competitive mountain biking, ski mountaineering races. I just never wanted to do it. Partly because I did so much intense competition when I was young, partly because I didn't want to race anything I wasn't going to win. That's sad. I'm changing my tune on that idea because, of course, you can compete and have fun in the outdoors. I know this because I have so many friends and I've published so many stories in magazines that deal with races and competitions. I've just been stuck in my own mind. And I did have a great experience competing for the fun of it a few years back. Gordon Wright of Outside PR invited me to join in on a leg of the multi-stage Run the Rockies race. It was going to be about 27 miles from Red Cliff to Vail. I thought it'd be a great opportunity to compete again and spend the summer running, since it was going to take place in August. Well, unfortunately, I didn't spend the summer running. I did maybe a 5-mile training run in the Sawatch Range, and that was it. I did mountain bike a lot, though. I went on a lot of big mountain bike rides that summer, so I was in cardio shape. About a week before I was supposed to be in the run, I called Gordon and I told him, "Man, I don't think I can do this. I haven't been running at all." And he said, "Relax, relax, you can do it." The weekend before the race, I spent re-roofing my house up in the sun on hot August days. And finally, the night before the race, it hit me. I hadn't trained at all, and this was going to be a bad idea. I called Gordon again, and he said, "No, it's fine. You can do it." So I showed up in Red Cliff with an incredibly enthused group of people who had been on the other legs of this run together. I got a partner who had been running with his son who got injured and could no longer do the race, and the two of us did it together. It was beautiful. Somehow I was in cardio shape to run for that long at a steady pace, but what really energized me was the joy of the people. We were all in it together. This wasn't like high school where the kid was puking in the garbage can next to me. This really was competing for fun. It did hurt in the end running down from the top of Mongolia Bowl to the bottom of Vale. It felt like my quads had been hit with a baseball bat. But it was an incredible feeling to go over that finish line. And it was a good reminder to me that fun comes to you in the outdoors, however you find it. Whether that's just being a bunch of dirty dirtbags out with your friends, or whether that's really spending a whole year training to compete in a race, all that matters is what you bring into it. I say all this because I am highly inspired both by the competitive level and fun level of my guest today, Billy Demong. Billy Demong grew up in the Adirondack Mountains of New York. A cross-country skier as soon as he could walk, he added the ski jumping skills to his resume when he was 8 and fell in love with the sport of Nordic combined. When he was 17, Billy relocated to Steamboat Springs to join a team of inspired young athletes. Together, they spent nearly 20 years breaking down barriers, and in 2010, Billy became America's first Olympic champion in Nordic skiing. After a World Cup career spanning 5 Olympic Games, Billy went on to build a leadership organization, USA Nordic Sport, to support the national ski jumping and Nordic combined teams. Billy currently resides in Park City, Utah with his 2 sons and partner Katie, building houses, trail running, mountain biking, and of course skiing. He has also been testing and working in product development for DPS's Phantom Glide, a treatment that replaces the need for typical Nordic ski prep and multiple layers of glide wax. Now let's open the container with Billy Demong. Okay, well, I'm excited to be here with an absolute legend, Billy Demong. It's great to have you on the show.
Yeah, Doug, thanks a lot for having me.
And I'm excited to talk to you on a wide range of topics here. And I think we're going to get right into it. And I'd like to know from you, as someone who's done some incredibly difficult things in the world, what is the hardest thing you have ever done?
All right. Well, the hardest thing I've ever done is probably I skied the Mount Rainier on the 4th of July a couple of years ago during COVID. It was like the first time, any of us had done anything around another person who wasn't, part of your household. And 3 of us hopped in a truck, drove to Washington from Utah or to Oregon from Utah, and got up at 2 a.m. and went all the way to the summit and skied what's known as like one of the hardest lines, which is the Führerfinger.
Oh, I've always wanted to do it. Yeah.
Yep. So we skied the Führerfinger on the 4th of July, which I don't highly recommend. There's a lot of open things to fall into. And then, after you survive that, there's like Home Depot bucket, 5-gallon pail size sun cups the rest of the way. So it was a hard up and a hard down.
Yeah. Whenever I've asked anyone about it, the response is always, I'm like, how is it? Is it hard? And they're always like, well, it could be deadly. It could be great.
I think that's a very true answer. Yeah. No, it was a really awesome adventure. And especially during COVID, finally get to be with a couple friends. And, we sort of eventually took the masks off somewhere around Boise But it was such a cool adventure. And like, we got there and it was raining and we did a little like crevasse rescue refresher,
Uh-huh.
just kind of of our own accord. And then got in the truck and slept. And then, and we woke up and it was like full moon, clouds clearing, see the peak 10,000 feet above you. And you're like, all right, it's going to be a heck of a morning.
Yeah, there's few places like Rainier for that kind of big adventure as well.
Yeah.
So, you obviously one of the best competitors in the world, won a gold medal, the first gold medal for the U.S. in Nordic events. Do you miss competing, or are you happy now just doing things like Rainier and just having smaller scale adventures than the big stage?
It's funny. I'm a decade out, honestly. It's like literally 10 years to the month of my last race. So I competed in the World Championships in Falun, Sweden in 2015. And for those first few years, it's like when you've been an elite athlete, I think a lot of us feel kind of selfish about it. I mean, you have to be to some degree, but there's a little bit of a guilt complex that builds up, I think, about all the time you spent, training and taking care of yourself and not really working per se. And so, for the first 5 years after I retired, I was definitely like just head down. I was a marketing director for a cycling company for Reynolds Cycling for a year, and then moved right into the USA Nordic role where I was really trying to like build an organization to kind of run the sports for ski jumping and Nordic combined in the United States. And it was a really hard pull at the oars. And I felt great. I was like, I can just, the more planes, trains, automobiles, late nights on the computer, I'm in, let's do it. And it wasn't until, you kind of like the baseline fitness is really down and you start to like, you hit your 40s, I think is a big one. And you start to realize what a big piece of your physical and mental health exercise is. And so I sort of like started getting back into it. And that's obviously not the most fun, easy thing to do. But I have to say, like now I try to like sign up and, pay to sign up for at least a race on the horizon all the time. Cause it sort of builds that level of accountability. And of late, I've been able to get back in shape enough in the last couple of years to where this winter I actually dropped into a couple of open college miles.
Huh.
So like, the Pocatello has a wooden track in the Simplot Stadium, a fairly famous old school banked wooden track. And my buddy's been, oh, you should come do it. You should come do it. So finally this year, I lined up. It was like driving to West Yellowstone, Montana for a ski race with the kids. I had 19 minutes from the time we pulled up to the door. He had shoes waiting for me inside. I ran around the track a couple times, stretched for a second, and then hopped in and ran a 4:55. And I was like,
wow, nice.
Just on fire, like almost last in my heat, and just felt awesome, just to be able to like go that hard. So I definitely still have the racer in me.
And is it okay to come in last, to not be at the very top? Does that hurt you in any way?
Absolutely. Absolutely. In fact, I coach the U12 and U14 Nordic athletes here in Park City for the club. And I like that age group a lot. Like there's not a lot of emotional engagement, like some, but like it's not like teenagers. And so, I can really come to practice. I can bring my, best knowledge. The kids listen. And one of the things that I find the most interesting is, a lot of kids coming into the sport are afraid to race. They're nervous about it. They have anxiety about it, or they are afraid of the pain. And it's a big thing for me is like, I'm like, we're not looking for you to be the fastest. We're looking for you to learn about yourself by putting a bib on. And every year I get a number of kids who didn't think they'd ever really enjoy it or do it, or parents who didn't think their kids were going to want to race or enjoy it. That all of a sudden by the end of the season, they're like, this is the greatest thing ever. And to me, like, that's the win, like, doesn't matter, first, 15th, 30th, doesn't matter, like being able to put a bib on, have the courage to go out. And especially, if you have anxiety or if you have some of the, like the fear of competition, like it's a good thing for you to be doing then, right? Because like we're going to end up in job interviews, we're going to end up in uncomfortable situations throughout our lives. And the more you get to work on it in a forum like skiing, the better you're going to be at it later.
Do you feel like those skills followed through for you, when you're out of competition and marketing and working in the professional world then?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I feel like, especially since I skied basically into my mid thirties, like, I don't often get anxious or nervous. And when I do, I usually have, quite a bag of tricks or tool chest, if you will, to dive into to be like, all right, like get it together. This too shall pass, just go do our best, etc. And so, and it wasn't like I was the best kid as a young athlete. I was not winning most of the time.
Hmm.
I think I was pretty above average cross country skier, pretty below average ski jumper. One of my coaches famously said to me one day when I was like 13 or 14, and I've been jumping pretty awful, and but you feel so much, so you're like, oh, hey, was that better? And he's like, you're the reason I smoke. So, it's like, I think from the get-go, it's like, I believe that people are highly trainable individuals. I try to bestow that on the athletes that I coach, and get them to focus more on their personal journey than winning or losing,
Right.
being afraid to lose,
Yeah.
afraid to fail. So yeah, for me, it's been, sports has been like my big passion, my big focus for most of my life. And I really believe that, there's so many parallels back to business. And in fact, I still enjoy, I'm not an executive coach on a professional level, but I, have quite a network that I, am around and work with and do some corporate speaking for. And it's really fun to kind of try to tie back some of the really cool experiences from skiing, and the, not just the training and the goal setting, but the innovation and efficiency, that the different stages of our growth as a team that allowed us to be successful in a sport that Americans had never been good at before.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Well, that's amazing. I mean, you're making me feel like I think I've stayed away from races because it's really competitive as a teenager and in my younger years, and you're making me feel less afraid to lose at that point. Like it's a good thing to just be in the race, huh?
Yeah, it's like, again, I mean, I think the last time I lined up at the mile, I did too. I was 72nd out of 80. And it was so, like, obviously pretty close to last, and it felt like a huge win to me, to be out there in my 40s, brave enough to line up with the college kids, and good enough to, like, run a 4:53 or
450. Yeah.
2
Yeah.
or whatever it was, like, and like 10 years ago, that would have been like, I probably would have had an issue like putting myself out there like that. But I line up at the local races. Sometimes I get beat by some college kid in town, or sometimes I've had bad whacks and I'm like getting passed by like 15-year-old kids on the downhills. I'm like, I mean, I don't know, I'm out here. The only thing that matters is I'm getting my heart rate over 170 for 20 minutes, and I know I'm gonna have a good week after this.
I love that. Are there some moments in your competitive career that really stand out for you? I mean, obviously winning the gold medal, right? But what are the moments that have really stayed with you now, 10 years out?
It goes back to the journey and really the team. I was lucky enough to be part of a fairly consistent group of athletes. Johnny Splain, Todd Lodwick, the Camerata brothers, for well over a decade. Obviously, most of us went to 4 or 5 games together. And to be able to like just work at the problem, and it was not always the same problem, right? Like, we came in as sort of like the underdogs, and we're trying to build up our ability to compete at the highest level. But along the way, in order to get there, we had to like make it our own, like stop doing what the Norwegians did, get up, go for jumping, and then have some brown cheese on toast with jam or whatever, and then go for a run, like we sort of like, as a team, and we hired back Dave Jarrett, who was one of our teammates. And, he was one of the few who actually went and got a degree in exercise physiology, and kind of came back to the sport because he felt like there was a better way. And we like sort of reinvented the wheel training wise. And then, once we had like a really good training platform that we were working from, we started to tweak, like, how are we going to tune this engine that we're building? We noticed that we're living high, we're training high, and we do our intensity low. But a lot of times that's, like, we're flying to Europe for a jumping camp and we're spending a lot of time doing intervals, or we're flying to San Diego just to do intervals. And that's when we started experimenting with supplemental oxygen. And at first it was indoors on a giant roller ski treadmill. And then that, was working great. And then we're like, well, the treadmill's kind of boring, so can we take it outside? So then we like got carbon fiber D-cylinder oxygen tanks and put them in camelbacks, and we're like skiing around town in the summertime looking like a bunch of spacemen in Lycra. And and so we went, and then not just on the cardiovascular side, but also on the jumping side. There was a lot of like hiring coaches from other countries, for their knowledge base, and then just kind of like starting to like build from what they could give us, and then tying it back to our own American system. But during my tenure, like it went from like you called the suit maker, you ordered a suit, you paid your money, and that was it, to like as it became increasingly custom, we started like everybody else sewing our own suits, and it eventually became like, okay, well now I have some questions, right? Like as you start to put a suit together, you're like, well, how could I? So now you're working with textile experts and sourcing fabrics and flying it in wind tunnels and trying to figure out like, well, what if we put this panel on the bottom and this panel on the top? Does that make me a better foil? And so like it was a really fascinating career. And when I won the Olympics, I was rooming with Johnny. So Johnny won a silver the first day.
Right.
We won the team event silver, and then he and I were gold and silver in the last race. And we were like in our room, our fourth Olympic Games together, just like staring at this pile of medals on the bed, and kind of like having the old like, holy shit, that was a good journey kind of moment. And it really was. It was all about the journey. Like the medals they're cool, like whatever. It felt great to finally get it done. But it was like looking back at all the things we did wrong and all the things we did right, and the fact that we had the wherewithal and the stick-to-itness to like be there, 12 years after our first Olympic start. It was pretty incredible.
Yeah, and I mean, I think for so many sports in the Olympics too, I mean, you're competing all year long, and then every 4 years there's this one time when there's this incredible, pressure to win and be the first to win, right? And where people are watching your sport who don't watch it any other time, right? Or get out there.
Yeah. No, it was wild too, because when I got on the team in like 97, 98 season, and I made the Olympic team the first time, we had a coach, Tom Stites, who had like kind of come in the side door and identified that Nordic Combined was an opportunity if he could get everybody in the US to bite off on coming together to live in a residency situation. Because he's looking at this like tiny sport in a big country, and he's like, but the best guy from the East is still living at home with his parents, training there alone. The best guy from Colorado is living in Steamboat, training alone, or with one other guy. There's, the kid from Park City, he's over there, the kid from the Midwest. And then they come together once or twice a year to like see who's the best. And then they go to World Cup and expect to do well. And it's like, but they're not in any sort of consistent program together where they could actually step off each other's shoulders. And I think his thesis was right on. And so he made everybody move to Steamboat. This predated me. So when I made the team in 97, it was like, all right, congratulations, you've been nominated, but if you want to be on it, you better show up at the pool building at 9 a.m. next Tuesday and find a place to live. And with that sort of like all of us coming together, he was also kind of media savvy. He had a lot of people with high expectations, both for Nagano and especially for Salt Lake City.
Right.
And so, we were this young team trying to make it happen, still trying to believe, and he's like telling us every day at team meetings, like, you guys, next winter in like 874 days, we got this coming at us and you are going to medal. And we're like, really? Are you sure? He's like, well, if you're not sure, then you can leave right now. We're all like, okay, we're pretty sure. And so we got, I don't want to say used to, but we kind of got beat up by some pretty high pressure and high expectations early on. And it wasn't really till after Salt Lake that we said, okay, we were close. We got fourth in the team event. A couple of us jumped into the top 10 in the individual event. And we're like, all right, now we're starting to really believe. Now we got to figure out what's it going to take. And that was actually that inflection point. We were like young 20s. Had we medaled in Salt Lake, we probably all would have quit and like gone on and disappeared and done something else. Or at least that's what my plan was. And then it was like, oh shit, we didn't get it done. Now we really need to like think about this. And so instead of trying to sprint to the finish like a teenager, we kind of like got steady in our adult lives, and we're like, all right, let's bring in the right experts. Let's start tweaking our training. Let's start adjusting our equipment. Let's do all the things that we can think of to make sure that we can be the best we can be. We're not learning to compete anymore. We're competing to win. And so it was really cool to do that last 8 years in the run into Vancouver, fairly well resourced with a really motivated group of coaches and athletes and support staff. And so like to bring it all home was, it was just like, it's actually, if you watch the video from Vancouver, I finally saw it like 6 years after. Like I was like in an office and one of the guys I was working with like pulled it up, a couple people gather around. He's like, and it was just the stadium audio. So you can hear the ski sounds, you can hear the people, and there's no announcing. You can kind of hear the venue announcer in the background. And I come into the finish and Johnny comes in like 5 seconds behind me or 2 seconds behind me. And I cross the finish line and we're hugging and I'm like, oh, that's cool. I remember that. And then I turn and look at the like little, reaction camera on the ground right next to me. I don't remember doing it, but I look at the camera and I go, that was pretty good. And just walk away.
Now that's the way to play it cool. That's awesome.
And I'm like, that's pretty much how I felt. Yep, that's it right there.
Well, it sounds like, and I think this transfers into business or anything anyone does, right? Sounds like it really was an institutional and communal victory when it came to it. I mean, you were the athlete who spurred it on, but obviously there was a lot behind you and so much time and so many people. Yeah.
It's a bigger team event than just the athletes, like the team of athletes are just a piece, of the whole puzzle. It takes a lot of leadership from the ski team to the individual disciplines and then all the support staff, whether it's PTs or we had suit makers and wax techs and, we had sports psychologists, like all the people. And, and that's why I think too, it felt so good. It's like this, we fucking earned this,
right.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, it wasn't like being 21 and being like hoping, wishing, wanting to sneak it. And then I don't know, like, I don't even know what it would have felt like. I think I would have been, so shy about it. I would have been like, all right, I snuck that one, time to move on.
And it's this crazy sport too, Nordic combined. It's like if you were to like run a mile and then have to like jump on a skateboard ramp or something like that, right? It's a weird combination.
It totally is. Yeah, it is. And it's funny to like analyze like why, like, obviously like why is the sport the way it is? Well, it's the original extreme sport, right. Like in the 1800s, people, were skiing around and they obviously decided like, well, who's the fastest? And then, as early as like the 1850s, they had like sanctioned jumping competitions for the adrenaline junkies of the time, like, well, what else can we do with these things? Oh, so you can jump the furthest. Oh, well, who's the best? Oh, whoever can jump the furthest and ski the fastest,
love it,
right?
Love it, yeah.
And then you sort of fast forward that for a century and a half and you end up with like this modern day exciting format with like one jump and a 10K pursuit race. And for me, it was like people always ask like, well, which one were you better at? Well, I was a little bit better at cross country, I guess, right. Statistically, but I really enjoyed jumping. Like even when it was not going well, it's a really frustrating sport, but I still I wanted the challenge of the technical aspect, the like weight restricted access, the equipment dialing in of ski jumping. It's like, and it was fun to like wear both hats in a day. You wake up and you're like, I'm light as a feather, I'm flexible, I need to fly, and also be somewhat of like an adrenaline junkie because you have like 1/4 of a second to make it all happen when you're going 60 miles an hour at a cliff, and then you fly away or you don't. And then no matter what happens, as soon as you land that jump, no matter how you're feeling about the jump, you have to switch gears and you got to like go hammer a big sandwich and make yourself feel big and strong. And you're going to go kill people in the cross country race. It is funny because when you look at the specialists of cross country and ski jumping, they're physically like diametrically opposed, right? And the Nordic combined guys are like trying to find that line. So take two of the hardest things you can do and then try to do both well.
It's interesting. I think we're sort of missing that in sports with kids today, right? They're really making kids specialize a lot more in a lot of sports, be it, football or running or whatever,
Yeah. And I think we're almost, well, so yes, you're absolutely right. You see it in football now. I think we're almost over that hurdle a little bit with like early sports specialization and talent identification. It's like one of those things that was like great when it was first mentioned, but got taken too far too fast. And, now we're seeing a lot of people going back toward like, multi-sport approach and, like keeping kids in more disciplines longer. And you see it even like in the NFL and the MLB, you have like, head coaches at the Major League Baseball level that are like, look, I am not looking for the kid coming out of high school who's like the best, the one who's had 6 hitting coaches, who's already had 50 pounds put on him. There's nothing more I can do for him. I want the kid who played, basketball and another sport in high school, who like is good enough at baseball to be in the room right now and hasn't really thought about it yet.
Right. Uh-huh.
Because, it's like, and, I being part of the club here in Park City, I'm a huge proponent of like, we have a shredders program where kids do, a couple of Wednesdays for a few weeks in freestyle, and then they come to ski jumping, and then they do cross country, and then they do alpine over the course of the season, and really try to like lead by example with my own kids. Like, people are like, well, what are you doing after school? I'm like, I don't know, man. Like, he's in the game lodge or whatever, it's the off season. And in the winter, like, I don't coach him, like I coach the group. And the only reason I coach him at all is he's in the group. But, as often as not, when we split 40 or 50 kids up 6 or 8 ways, he's not in my group.
You're listening to Rock Flight Radio. My God, is that Fitz's music? You know it is. Get ready for There's a Smile on My Toes.
Woke up this morning feeling so alive. Sunshine in my step, making my spirit jive. Whole foot comfort wrapping me so sweet. Dancing on clouds with every beat. There's a smile on my toes every single day. Cool and warm together in a brilliant play. Free range toe box lets my feet sing. Fits is the joy that each new step brings. Deep heel pocket hugging me just right. Fine gauge merino soft like the moonlight. Laughing and skipping, feeling so fly. In a happy place with every stride. There's a smile on my toes every single day. Cool and warm together in a brilliant play. Free range toe box lets my feet sing. Fits is the joy that each new step brings.
That was There's a Smile on My Toes from Fitz, because that's what whole foot comfort looks like. New spring styles are in stores now. Didn't get your orders in? No need to cry. Just send Judy. You know Judy. Everyone knows Judy. Send Judy an email at customerservice@fitzsock.com, and she'll turn those frowns upside down. Oh, tell your feet that we said hi. And now, back to the show.
So, I mean, you did, though. I mean, it's great that you paved the way, for your sport, for Nordic skiing, for Nordic combined. Have you noticed a difference since you guys won the medals? Have you been happy to see the results? More kids wanting to do this, wanting to jump off things?
There was a really good uptick for about 10 years. And I would say the sport of ski jumping as a whole in the United States, especially, like, really came back up. At the club level, there was a lot more kids competing, and I was part of that. Internationally, Nordic Combined has gone through some pretty tough times, and it's not necessarily that much has changed. But with the the IOC's Agenda 2020 and limiting the number of the athletes at the games, there's been a lot of pull from big sports quota to like make room for some of the newer disciplines. So Alpine and cross country, biathlon have had to give up some of their quota spots. And realistically, Nordic Combined was sort of like the weak one on the political totem pole. And so, like right now, even though the viewership at World Cup level is still strong, the metrics from the last couple games, especially being in Asia, not being on at convenient times for the American viewing audience, it's not in a pretty position at the Olympic level. So that's really disappointing. It's something that, I'd love to try to figure out how to sustain it and grow it at the Olympic level again. And obviously with my role as the director for the USA Nordic sport, I was doing that. And now I'm, basically trying to think of ways to help increase the popularity again. We definitely, I think we transitioned pretty well from my era to the next. And those athletes have had podiums and they've had some good results. But I think we're a little bit at a inflection point right now with the Olympic movement in general. Like, are we moving toward X Games because we think it can make more money, or are we actually truly going to try to do the best with the most historic disciplines that we have? And I think, right now, Nordic Combine's right in the tipping point.
Are we ever going to win a medal in biathlon?
Oh, I mean, so Tim Burke and Lowell Bailey, obviously contemporaries of mine. We all grew up in the Saranac Lake Placid area, medaled at the World Championships. Lowell became the first American world champion. And they're both working for US Biathlon. And there was a surprise medalist this year. And it's embarrassing. I can't remember his name off the top of my head. Wes? Is that right?
I'm not sure.
This is like literally a Google-worthy search.
we can Google
America
it and go back.
Had a biathlon world championship medalist this year. So, I do think we will, or we should. But there's so few opportunities. Campbell Wright, silver medal in the 10K and the 12.5K pursuit this year.
So we're getting there. We're going to get an Olympic one eventually.
Well, there's no guarantees, and that's why it's sport, right?
Right.
But I think, US Biathlon is in really good hands right now. They've got great leadership with two athletes who have been personally successful. And obviously they've got talent in the pipeline if they're already medaling at Worlds again.
That's great news, because it's kind of a funny thing. I feel like I'd like to see us actually, it's always fun to see us win medals. Like when you guys won, to see us win medals in sports where we historically have not or don't do well.
I think biathlon is the last discipline the U.S. has never won an Olympic medal in.
So that'll be a big deal.
Yeah, it will be. And ski jumping might as well be, because the only medal that's ever been won in ski jumping was in the first Olympic Games. Anders Haugen got third. However, they scored him as fourth, and it wasn't until he was passed away in the 1950s that somebody spotted the calculation error. So he was awarded a bronze medal posthumously 30 years after the event.
That's insane. And that's the only one we've ever won in ski jumping?
Only one ever.
I did not know that. That's great. Huh.
Yep.
So, a little more, I want to talk about what you're doing now, but I guess the one last thing, while we're on what you have done with the Olympics is, there's obviously a lot of political division in the country right now, but it does seem that the Olympics and the success of American athletes still seems to unify us. How do you think that athletes and competition can really continue to do that, to kind of transcend politics and get people to come together in a way they're not otherwise?
Well, it's a great question. I mean, I think, sports in general, obviously, as I shared, my belief is that we can build better humans through lessons in sport, and that they can take that on to their personal life, their professional life, whether it's the work ethic and the perseverance of learning to train, or, when you're training to compete, you're really like teaching those lessons of like how to deal with anxiety and how to get to your best. And those type of routine building exercises, things like that. But, you look across not only the life lessons you can gain from sport, but also touching back on what I was saying, I'm 40 years old and I'm trying to feel good, like exercise is real. And I think, not only is just getting out and, going for a walk or a run or going to the weight room for a half hour a good thing, the accountability of competition, we want to be our best. We want to do the best we can. So, putting ourselves out there as we get older, I think also is important, because it's not only the day of the competition, but if it's in the back of your mind, it's going to drive you to do things you might not normally do. Eat a little better, sleep a little longer, drink a little less, train a little more, all the things that we need to function at a high level. So I think it's really good for our personal physical being and our mental health. But then I think, coming together around, watching sports, and whether it's watching your kids' game or, your friends' kids, or, the local professional team or whatever, there's just a lot of camaraderie that breaks down, like you said, the political barriers. And there's one thing I want to kind of steer the question a little bit. So one of the offshoots of the sort of fallout of the whole like safe sport era, the Larry Nassar scandal, is that there was an Olympic Reform Commission that Congress asked to be seated a couple years ago, and that commission sat and amongst their findings, I think there's an overwhelming theme of under-resourced. And I think when we look at the U.S. Olympic movement in this country, it's a huge job that's being done by a nonprofit that's federally mandated to monetize the value of the Olympic rings in this country. And I think when that was envisioned to, take college level athletes, college age athletes to the games, back in the 70s, when Prefontaine basically, fought for the Amateur Sports Act, that was a good thing. And I think it's still a great organization, but I think the amount of resources they can generate out of that monopoly of the Olympic rings is just, it's starting to slide further and further away from relevant. We have so many sports that aren't in the college sphere anymore. There's a lot of athletes and a lot of pipelines that need a lot of funding to pursue their event to like physical maturity and competitive maturity. And one of the things that the commission found was, there are other avenues that the U.S. government could consider to further resource sport in America. So whether it's something like an industry tax, like, the Robertson-Pittman Act is actually a tax on firearms and ammunition, for instance, and it goes into wildlife preservation, right, ensuring the future of the industry, right, through taxing the industry today. And so, there's been talk about taxing online sports betting and distributing it state by state to make available funds for infrastructure investments or youth scholarships, et cetera, reduce the barriers to entry to sport. And there's programs like the World Class Athlete Program under the U.S. military that could be expanded to several thousand athletes instead of like several dozen athletes, and give career opportunities to both athletes and coaches, sort of under the U.S. military umbrella. And I think that would also, going back to sort of the peacekeeping side of sport, having more armed service men and women, basically we already sort of put them in the bucket of they're competing for the United States of America, right? And yet they're paying their own way to do it. And so I think that seems pretty unsustainable to me. I feel like I was the last generation of athletes who sort of were funded at the national level to the games rather than funding your way to the games, right, and then hoping it all works out. And so, I do think politically speaking, we're in a really prime time with that commission having released its findings. Congress asked for the findings, and now, it would be really cool to see some legislative activity and some bipartisan legislative activity to, really improve the future for American athletes from top to bottom. And especially with 2 U.S. games on the horizon in 28 and 32, I think we could reshape our entire country's future in sport.
That's fantastic. And are you actively working towards that now? Is that something in what you're doing now?
I think I put a lot of time and effort into that, and I would love to be part of it. I think having spent a lot of time lobbying, both at the commission, I never asked to be on the commission, but I did meet with the director and some of the commissioners. I was actually part of the team that suggested that we add the commission to the amateur sports, or what is it called? It's like the Olympic Athlete Reform Act or something like that. Basically like a retune a bit of the Amateur Sports Act, the Empowering Olympians Act or something like that. But in any case, I was part of lobbying to get the commission in. And so, I think, and having seen where not only do we have some bigger issues that we need to solve, we have some longer term, deeper issues that we need to address at the same point if we're going to stay relevant and competitive at the Olympic level. And we need to support our athletes better, quite frankly. So I guess the long-winded answer to your question is I will always love to play a role. I think I need to take a break from doing it as a profession and quite so hard. But I bring it up on this podcast just because I always want to make people aware that, this isn't as pretty as it looks on TV sometimes. And I love Paris. It was the first games that I've really watched en masse in a long time. And I think it really showed that not only is this movement, still current, it's really it's got a bright future, especially with the way media can deliver it now, and the breadth of opportunities that NBC and all of its partners are able to share it back to us here in the U.S. And so I would just love to see I'd love to see a future where, I don't see 100 GoFundMe's going on every year for all the athletes in my network. You know what I mean? Like, I really feel like there's a better future. We're better than this. And I would love for as many people in America to know that we can change it if we want to.
It was great in those Paris games to see, what was it, Flavor Flav like stepped up for the women's water polo team, right? But it'd be great if individuals didn't have to contribute to them, as you were saying, as if if we were getting the government support.
And I think it's cool. It raises awareness a little bit, but at the same point, like, we got to ask ourselves, like, okay, Flavor Flav solved one little piece of a giant puzzle, but extrapolate that across all these teams. Most of these athletes are not having that problem solved. So they're out fundraising, they're working a lot of jobs. You know what I mean? This has gone beyond like unfair. Like, our talent pools are being divided by parents' balance sheets and networks at an early age. We're not going to have the best athletes be able to pursue these for any length of time. And on top of that, the more you let private money into a program like that, you do risk having them get steered, right? I'm not saying Flavor Flav would do it, but I see it. There's a lot of really generous, philanthropic, wealthy individuals that fund a lot of the NGBs and the USOPC, and that's great. But what if they really have favorites? I liken it to US Ski and Snowboard, like, great organization, but I think it's very Alpine centric because that's where a lot of their donor base's main focus is, right? Is around Alpine. And so then freestyle and Nordic and snowboard are like sort of like second fiddle always.
Well, that's great to know. And I think it's something that a lot of people don't know. So it's really important to get that out there. But let's move on from it. Let's talk about what you are doing now for a little bit, which is kind of how we were able to get you on the podcast. I know you've been working for DPS and you've been working with Phantom Glide Wax. What are you doing there? What's that for you?
So it's been a really fun journey. I've got a video on my phone from 8 years ago when what is now known as Phantom Wax was first deployed on a pair of Nordic skis to be tested. And it was the marketing director at DPS. They discovered this great new alternative to waxing. And it's a monomer, so a very small molecule that's designed to basically penetrate through a ski base and bond to the polyethylene in the base material and give it a permanent hydrophobic coating. And so, I was all in. At that point, I was like in charge of the national teams for ski jumping and Nordic combined. So we put it on a couple pairs of test skis and sent it off. And, the techs were like, yeah, this stuff's good. It's not as good as some of the best waxes we can find on the day, but it's good. And so with that, kind of armed with that, over the last 8 years, I've always had it on my skis. And it wasn't until a couple of years ago when I was catching up with some of the people at DPS, I was like, well, how's it going with Phantom? Oh, it's pretty good, but like, we're having a hard time, figuring out, like, it's really for like recreational skiers that don't want to wax. And I'm like, really? Why? And they were like, well, because it's not great all the time. It's just really good most of the time. And I'm like, well, that's still better than most wax. And I was like, for what it's worth, personally, I'm like, I don't wax as much, but I do wax for condition-specific glide, especially on race day. But, like, I've never felt any penalty for waxing over it either. So I think, I look at it more as like a foundational base layer.
Oh, interesting, huh?
And they were like, oh, that's really interesting. So that's when they asked me to kind of come in and start helping them test the new Nordic formula and just kind of like helping understand better, like how to think like a Nordic skier who's usually a wax geek. And to be honest, like, because I got really serious about it with them, I got like 6 pairs of matched atomic race skis, from the factory, all identical. I had 3 traditionally base prepped, which is a pretty intensive process where you put wax on the ski, you put it in a hot box that keeps the ski molten and penetrating for like an hour, and then you pull it out and you scrape it, and then you put a slightly colder version of wax on the ski, and you put it back in the sun, and you pull it back out and you scrape it and you brush and you do it again with another wet layer. And then I actually just did 3 like that and 3 with just Phantom. And Phantom, it actually, the chemical itself reacts with ultraviolet light. So you can either do it in like the special Phantom box that a lot of the shops
Right.
have, or if it's above 70 degrees, you can literally just go outside, wipe it on your skis, and leave them in the sun for an hour, and you're good to go. And so, basically you can watch it penetrate and dry off. And then you just clean the little bit of residue off with they include like a Fibertex polishing pad. And in this year, so I was doing a lot of testing that would resonate with Nordic crowd, like just glide out testing, feel testing, velocity testing. And I was testing both the traditionally prep ski versus the Phantom skis to start. But then I started testing waxing over the Phantom against skis that had Phantom but had never been waxed, and just testing like durability and glide and speed. And it was really interesting because like by the midpoint in the season, I knew a lot more of how broad the range of temperatures that this stuff really runs in was. And also because I was waxing for races for the kids that I coach in a lot of conditions, I was also testing it against Phantom all the time on match skis. And it was odd how many times Phantom actually beat the race wax.
Oh, that's great. And so I think another thing I think you're really involved right now in, we touched on it a little bit, but I think that, mentoring kids and bringing kids up and bringing them to the sport, getting them to race, as you were telling me, getting them to compete. What are you doing along those lines right now? What are you working on?
Yeah, I mean, so like since I retired from, my professional role as a sports administrator, I've actually been building houses. But my sort of goal since then was I always want to be able to afford to coach. And what I mean that is like, obviously coaching doesn't pay, and it's a fairly time intensive deal. Like I coach like 4 days a week, 2 hours a day after school. So I have to be done with whatever I'm doing and ready to rock to coach, not just weekday practices, but also the weekends, where we host races or we travel to Idaho, Wyoming, Montana, whatever to race. And so, I really enjoy not just, being on snow and coaching, but also, almost a little bit, I challenge, they're 12 to, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14. It's a pretty broad range. But, kids at that age are sponges and they're really developing their ability to comprehend and understand. And so I love like, being able to help them, think through like, what is a warm up? What is it really? Like, why are we doing, what we're doing? And then giving them, not only the wherewithal to do a good warm up, but then to think about it from a like, well, what do you think you need more of, or what could you have done less of? And not just warm ups, but talking about nutrition and travel and all the other aspects of becoming an elite athlete. And so for me, it's fun. We've got a big group of kids. They're all super hungry to make it to actually. Do you remember Liz Stevens? She's a cross country skier from Vermont who at one point she was the fastest in the Tour de Ski hill climb.
Oh yeah.
So,
yeah.
Basically the fastest woman in the world uphill on skis. And she's the head coach for the older kids. And so it's fun, because I'm kind of like trying to learn to train to compete so that they're ready to go to her,
And now, I mean, talking about kids, I know you have kids of your own, and I've read that your dad was a environmental biologist and was a big influence on you. Obviously, just getting you out in the woods beyond competition. What kind of time do you spend with kids or even with yourself like that, just out in nature, enjoying things beyond sport?
It's kind of funny because, I just in the last day, I was actually in Placid last week, just to tie this all together. The U.S. Ski and Snowboard Hall of Fame induction was in Lake Placid. So I was like, got inducted before Justin Koski, who runs it, asked me to come back and, help kind of put the event on a little bit. And I was like, absolutely, I'll go home. It was my birthday too. And I could see my parents. So last weekend I went and I caught up with my dad, who's, right in the middle of making maple syrup and all the good outdoor stuff. And I yanked a pair of wooden skis with 3-pin bindings out of the garage and went for like some 20-kilometer backcountry tour around Paul Smith's. And then flew back out here, and I haven't skied since I got back. And it's been good. Like we've had a couple big powder days, but I'm back into home building. I'm trying to catch up from coaching. And, 5 people in the last day or two have been like, oh, you've been skiing? I'm like, no. And the funny thing, and you asked about what do I do? It's like, I coach all winter. My kids are in ski programs. One of my sons is on the figure skating program as well. It's busy. And I don't have a lot of time for resort skiing. And the limited bit of time I have on skis in the winter is backcountry. But man, from this point on till we run out of snow, which could be June or July, it's all about backcountry skiing. And then both my kids, not only do they like to backcountry ski, we've, the older son and I have done some pretty big peaks around here, like Deseret Peak and Baldy. Like, I think the first thing he ever skied when he was like 10 on a big day was like Baldy Main Chute, after season or something. We get into that. And then the other thing we're really getting into is the desert, so we've been doing some canyoneering and some camping, and I think everybody gets a lot out of turning devices off and being out of service and, having to poop in a bag or whatever.
Always a good learning experience. Yeah.
Carry your own water, all that.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Oh, that's great. Well, Billy, it's been so good to talk to you. I don't feel like we covered half of the things we were saying we were going to cover in this conversation, but I love what we did talk about. And to wind down, I will ask you the question we ask everyone at the end of this podcast, which is simply, what gives you hope?
I mean, not to tie this all together again, but like kids in sport give me hope. Like watching people develop and like go from like, oh, I'm never going to do that to like, oh my God, I did it. And, and then seeing those same people sort of mature into adulthood and have like their own visions of where to go, gives me a lot of hope for good leadership and into the future. So
that's great. Well, it's been such a pleasure to have you on and talk to you. And as I said, you inspired me. I'm like, hey, I got to go enter some kind of race and not care how I do now. And that's a great thing.
Absolutely.
To happen in this short conversation.
Sign up for something weird, like, some long something with some buddies that, you'll all call each other and text each other every time you go and actually get a workout done. Or if the other guy texts and says, oh yeah, I went out and ran, or I did my thing, you'd be like, damn, no, I got to go. It's great.
Great. Well, Billy, thank you. Absolute legend and inspiration. And it was so glad to have you on the show. Hope we'll see you again soon, Tom.
Thanks a lot, Doug. It's been great to be here.
Thanks for imbibing Open Container, a production of Rockfight LLC. Please take a second to follow our show on whatever podcast app you're listening to us on, and send your emails and feedback to myrockfight@gmail.com. Follow Billy Demong on Instagram @Billy Demong and learn about Phantom Glide at dpsskis.com. Our producers today were David Karstad and Colin True. Art production provided by Sarah Gensert. I'm Doug Schnitzbahn. Get some. Thanks for listening.